So let's go ahead and get started. I know we have some people coming in. We'll let them get settled as we do a little bit of an introduction. So welcome everyone. Today we will be talking about the executive function skills in the thoughts bucket. And these are critical brain skills to nourish, flourish, and thrive. And I'm Kelly Spano. I am the Chief Organizational Learning Officer for the Children's Guild Alliance. And with me this evening is Angelique McCoy.
Good evening. I'm Angelique McCoy, the Talent Development Coordinator at the Children's Guild Alliance. Welcome. So what we like to do at the beginning of our workshops, for those who are joining for the first time, welcome. And for those who have been here in the months prior, welcome back, is we like to share some housekeeping just for the webinar format. We first want to let you know that this webinar will be recorded so that it can be previewed at a later date. Please keep your video on if possible, just so we can have some great engagement and be able to look at you while you're looking at us. We'll definitely be using the chat function as a means of communication, so feel free to share your thoughts, your impressions. We love when you use the emojis, the thumbs up, the smiles, and even sometimes the frowns if we say something that really hits home. We will ask that you mute your audio so that we don't have any additional background noise. And then just stay engaged, get ready to learn some new things about executive function skills and be open to some new ideas. And always remember, you'll leave with some strategies to use. Kelly, back over to you.
All right, thanks, Angelique. All right, so let's get started. Our topic today is executive function thoughts skills. Yay! All right, so this evening, we're going to start off right at the beginning with getting our brains warmed up. So we're going to do a little poll to see kind of where your executive function skills are right about now. So you're going to see a poll come up. We'd like you to find out which statement best describes you. And I know there might be a few that you think, that's really me too. Try to pick best one. And enter that in the poll. And then at the end of the webinar this evening, we'll go back and take a look at how well we did. So take a moment, read them over, and then go ahead and rate yourself. All right, so we're going to stop the poll, and we're going to hold on to those results to the end, and then we're going to share them with you. But first, we're going to give you a little bit more information to help you understand what each of these statements really means. All right. So if you found that you had more than one, or maybe you had several, don't worry. We just need to tune up those executive function thinking skills, and you're in the right place to get that work done. So when we think about our executive functions, it's kind of like what you see in this picture. It's like a traffic control center. So we all know that at an airport, there are airplanes coming in and out. And each of those operators has to be diligent about paying very strict attention to the monitors. They need to make sure that people are on time, they're on the right ramp, that they're not too high, they're not too low, they're coming in at the right altitude. And if they were to get distracted, we could have chaos. And so their job, it's imperative that they're focused, they're attentive, and they're watching all the stimulus coming in and out the whole time they're on duty, much like our executive function. So how do we describe the executive function then? What we like to do is use the definition that's been put forth by the Center of the Developing Child at Harvard University. And the way they describe it is, it's the mental processes that enable us to plan, focus, pay attention, remember instructions, and juggle multiple tasks at the same time. And they too compare it to the air traffic control, where they're managing all the arrivals and the departures on all the different runways. And the brain needs this skill of executive function to be able to filter out distractions, to be able to prioritize our tasks, to set and achieve our goals, and to control that impulse to maybe give up or do something different. So when we're talking about executive functions, we're talking about all of the skills that help us get through the day-to-days. So let's break that down for a minute. If we look at our memory, our planning, our creativity, our ability, and our attention, basically what we're talking about is everything we need to do to get stuff done is what our executive function is all about.
So tonight, we're going to start our conversation about the 3 buckets within the executive function skills. And those would be the thoughts, which is what we are going to address tonight. And in the upcoming months, emotions and actions. Each of these skills falls within a different bucket, and we want to take some time unpacking each of the 3 buckets. For those who are not with us last month, we actually have prepared a placemat, which is really awesome, and it shows you the entire gamut of the executive function skills in one place, grouped together by those buckets. So if you were not with us last month, you can download this particular piece of material for free at our website, childrensguild.org, and that way you can have it with you as we continue this conversation over the next couple of months. So when we think about the science behind all of the executive functioning talk, we want to really remind you that things like strong working memory and self-regulation, or sometimes we consider it to be self-control, and that ability to shift and maintain when it comes to your attention are really the foundations that social and academic successes are built upon. Without these 3 areas, we find that we would struggle in those different gamuts. So the science tells us that obviously, if we develop those skills, we are unlocking immense potential to do great things and to stay on task and to really achieve our goals. But then that stands to reason that if we have deficits within the executive function skills, that we will be kind of stuck and not be able to live up to our fullest potential and have our personal best in everything that we do. So that's why we want to talk about these and unpack these tools tonight for you. But remember, we've talked about the power of the brain, and the learning never stops, the growth never stops. And every single one of us is born with the capacity to develop these skills, the capacity to grow these skills, and also the capacity to lag in these skills. As we have told you in the past, they reside in the prefrontal cortex, part of your brain, and literally they start in almost in infancy, around 6 months. And through the learning, whether it's of the environment, whether it's of schooling, of genetics, all of that is really happening around the first 2 years of life, where you get that jump start. But it continues throughout your young adulthood to about age 30. So there is a great window of availability open for us to be able to sharpen those skills that are lagging. And yes, Lori, about the placemat, we will definitely post that information on a website where you can receive it at the end of the workshop. So when you think about the conversation of nature versus nurture, we've all heard about it depending on the genetic side or depending on the environmental side. It's the same conversation with executive function skills. When you think about those children, those young people who are grown up in those nurturing environments, who are able to control their impulses, make plans, they're able to regulate their behavior, because of the environments that they live in, where everything is stable and everything is calm, they tend to have more happier lives. They tend to have more stability. They tend to enjoy themselves cognitively much more. However, children who have no control over their environment and they are brought up into a situation similar to the genetic factor, where they live in a chaotic environment, things are unsafe, the caregivers are not as stable and predictable, and they're not providing that environment that would give that child a launch pad, or they're providing a traumatic environment. These are the environments where students and our children may develop those ineffective brain centers as it pertains to executive function. So there's definitely a conceptual idea of nature versus nurture when you think about how the brains are hardwired to protect themselves. We talk often about the amygdala and the various parts of the brain that help us to survive at any cost. And so if a child is being brought up in an unstable or an unpredictable environment, their brains are constantly on high alert, which will cause deficits in their executive function skills.
So a question for us to think about tonight is, behavior really a choice? So let's think about this. A child's ability to succeed is really based on their ability and capability of understanding A, what's being required of them, and then being able to regulate their behavior to meet that requirement. So let's look at an example. If you give a child a series of directions to follow, let's say we have a 5-year-old, and we say to the 5-year-old, welcome to class, hang up your book bag, take out your red folder, take out the paper on the left-hand side, write your name on the top of the paper, and then color in the picture. And all of a sudden that child goes into a meltdown, and you're thinking, well, that's ridiculous. Why are they doing that? Chances are you've outweighed their capacity to comprehend and fulfill the expectation because they couldn't keep it in their head. So when their executive function is working smoothly and their developmentally appropriate expectations, our children are able to develop flexible thinking skills that help them remember what we want them to do and then follow through. So the next time you give a direction or a series of directions and the child doesn't follow through, ask yourself the question, is that really them being non-compliant, or have I exceeded the expectation of what they're able to do at this moment? Something to think about. So when our executive function is delayed or impaired, it's most likely that our kids are going to fail. Now think of the situation where we're in, where our children are coming back to school. They haven't been in the schoolroom for a while. Chances are their executive functions are dysregulated. So maybe they can't sustain attention for more than 5 minutes and the lesson's a half hour. Or maybe the fact that they can't hold 5 directions in their head right now. So we have to think about what's going on with our children and whether or not we're meeting them at their level of development at this time. Because when there's a disconnect between their capacity and our expectations, our children are going to result to the fight or flight, or as Angelique just talked about, they're going to be in that amygdala of, I can't do this. And they're going to fail. So when we have a child who's acting out, non-compliant with whatever the expectation is, typically the adult response is, we want to correct the behavior. We want to tell them, no, don't do that, do this. But do we think about what got in their way and why they didn't comply? We don't. And so what happens is a power struggle. The child's frustrated because they don't understand what they're supposed to do, or they're so frustrated because they have too much and they're overwhelmed. And then this power struggle ensues and the adult and the child disconnect. What we need to do instead is really use this opportunity to build that relationship to understand what got in the way of that child doing what we asked them to do. Was there a lagging skill? Was there an executive function dysregulation that was impacting their ability to follow through? And so when we begin to understand that behavior, we begin to empathize with them and connect on a different level that then allows us to engage in problem-solving behaviors as opposed to punishment or correcting and possibly embarrassing the child because of the meltdown. So it's really important that we dive into these executive functions and figure out the impact that they're having on the child's ability to be compliant with your expectation, whether it's in the school, whether it's in your home, whether it's in the community. And what research says is that our children who have disabilities, particularly children with autism or other developmental disabilities, they struggle with their behavior oftentimes as a result of a deficit in executive function. And if we know that, then one of the things we need to be thinking of is how do we teach executive function skills to our children? And that's exactly what we're going to do this evening. So our first bucket is going to be the thoughts bucket. And within this bucket, there are 5 functions we're going to talk about this evening: metacognition, flexibility, working memory, time management, and planning and prioritizing. And for each of these, we're going to talk about what it looks like, what it means, and then what are some strategies you can use to help build these skill sets in the children that we work with. All right, so now this is where you get to think a little bit again. I want you to think about, have you ever heard, "I can't do this"? Or maybe you heard this one, "I quit." Or how about this one, "I'm never going to understand this stuff." Have you ever heard any of those things? Chances are you have. If you're in working with children or you're a parent, chances are you've heard those things before. Some people have even heard all 3. Me too. So let's take a look then. What we want to help children do is transition from this "I can't" to "how can I?" And one of the ways we're going to do that is by looking at and developing their metacognition skills. So what is metacognition? It's really simple. All it means is thinking about your thinking. So let's figure out, how does that work then? One of the things we could be asking ourselves when we begin to struggle or have a challenge is, why is this so hard for me? Or maybe we think about, why am I stuck? Or maybe even, how can I think of this another way? And I can tell you, earlier today, I was working on a project and I went through each and every one of those questions because I was stuck. I could not develop this chart that I was trying to get done. And I knew that if I could just step back and think about my thinking, clarity would come. And what research says is that the more we teach children to use metacognitive strategies, the more resilient and successful they're going to be, because they know how to stop, to think of alternatives, to problem solve, and then continue to move forward. Some of the work that really fits in here is the work of Carol Dweck. And many of you probably have heard of the fixed or the growth mindset. I really liked this quote. "Thinking about our thinking creates perspective. Perspective leaves room for change." So if you really break that down, if we think about our thinking, like, why am I stuck? And we look at it a different way, not only are we engaging strategies of problem solving, but we're creating that space for us to change our strategy and resolve the issue. If you are someone who has a fixed mindset, this is difficult for you because you look at challenges as either I can do this or I can't do it. There's no in between. It's this negative perspective that takes over your self-talk of, I can't do math. I've never been good at math. I can't learn math. There's no math I can do. End of story. As opposed to the growth mindset, who looks at challenges as an opportunity to practice. And what they frequently think about is, I can't do this yet. A new strategy, a new perspective, a new way of tackling this problem will help me get through it. So by using a growth mindset, we're actually developing the skill sets of metacognition that build in this reflective thinking about our thinking. So we know that the more we think about our thinking, the greater impact it has on our ability to self-regulate. Because when we begin to feel that amygdala saying, uh-oh, I can't do this, what we have to then do is have this awareness of, I need to think about what's getting in my way. I need to think about, is there another strategy? Is there someone I can ask for help? Is there somewhere I can go get help? So we now are looking at viable solutions to a problem. And when children begin to understand that they can manage difficult situations, they don't get so overwhelmed. And I know many of you are thinking, yeah, but how do you teach kids that? Well, what we teach them is that they are the driver of their brain. So when their brain starts getting out of control and wanting to take them in the wrong direction, they have to steer it back in the right path and get their brains thinking and problem solving so they can move along. So let's take some examples. Explicit teaching is one of the things we do in the classroom when we're trying to make sure that children understand the concept, have an opportunity to practice it, model it, and then build in a reflection at the end. So some of you are thinking, well, I'm not a teacher. How does that work? Let me give you an example. So as we know, spring will be here early or later this week, right? So I'm a huge baseball fan, so I'm going to give you a baseball example. So your child is getting ready to try out for Little Leagues, right? So what you do is you say, all right, let's get some practice in before we try out for the team. So we go in the backyard and we say, all right, now remember, this is how we hold the bat, hand over hand. Great. And remember, when you hit the ball, you drop the bat and we run. So the new skill I want to teach you is how to slide into base. Kid says, I don't know how to slide into base. Right. So I'm going to teach you. There are 3 ways to slide into base. You have a bent leg slide, you have a hook slide, and then you have the head first slide. Never do the head first slide on first base. You never do any slide on first. So we teach the child, we model it, the kid practices it. We have opportunities to run and slide into first, or slide into second and slide into third. And we do all these practices. And in the end we go, okay, so how'd that go? What do you think about that? Do you think you're going to use one over the other? And we begin to ask these questions that help the child to reflect on, hey, yeah, I really like the hook slide, but I don't feel so comfortable going head first. And so this is a way that we model our thinking, we model the activity, and then we give these open-ended questions so the child begins to reflect on what they've learned and what strategies they might be able to use when the situation arises. All right, let's take a look at a couple of examples. Next slide. All right, so here's a worksheet that we can use in a school that helps kids just to start thinking about thinking. So sometimes when children come in, whether it's in the morning or maybe it's after lunch, and they just need to kind of settle before they're ready for instruction, you can have them, I'm thinking about, or I'm wondering. So let's say today we're going to talk about dinosaurs. And I want you to draw me a picture of what you're wondering, what you're thinking, what are you seeing? And these are ways to be able to get our children to reflect on their thoughts. So the more we ask them to reflect on what are you thinking, what are you seeing, what are you understanding, that's metacognition, and you're developing those strategies. Here's a couple other examples. For the older children, what we teach them how to do is begin with assessing the task. So they evaluate what are the things I have to do, And typically older children have multiple parts of an assignment. What are my strengths and weaknesses in these areas? Plan out their approach. Do they want to do the hard things first? Do they want to do the easy things first? What strategy works for them? Apply their strategies and then reflect on how did it work? You can do the same thing with your work if you're someone that is working on your metacognitive skills. And we have one more example for the younger children, and this time it's called the before, during, and after. So before we ask the child to do the task, we could ask some of these questions. Have I done this before? Think about your strategies you might use and what are your goals? And then during the activity, as you see children working, you could look at trial and error. So I don't really know what to do. Well, let's do a little trial and error, see if it works. Have them try it out. And then figure out, is that strategy working for me? And at the end, again, go back to looking at what worked well. So I know there's a question about, so what if a child has difficulty with communication? So one of the things we use there is we could either do a communication board and have children, look at the activities they're going to do and prioritize them by moving the Velcro or numbering them if they're an older child. And then looking at strategies. And that could be a visual representation of a strategy. And maybe there's 2 or 3 strategies. And have the child pick out which strategy they're going to use on the visual communication board and then try it. And then they can reflect and they can do it in a smiley face, a frowny face, or it was okay. So there's ways to adapt these for even children that are non-communicative, and that we have to find another way of finding an alternative way to help them really think about their thinking.
And I will say, with many of, I'm watching the chat as well, with many of the skills and the strategies that we'll be sharing, you can find many of these worksheets online if you are looking up under that specific bucket. So looking under metacognition think sheets, you'll be able to find them. But also just in my clinical work as a therapist, there was a question about how do you get a teen to participate when they've already closed down. A lot of the skills that we're and the strategies we're teaching should be something that is ongoing and not waiting until we hit the wall, but literally beginning to set up situations where we're constantly helping our students and our children when they are calm, when they are in stable functioning, when we have their attention. Hey, let's practice this, or let's try this, so that when they do, when and if they do get closed down, we'll have the opportunity to be able to reach back into our toolbox. Hey, remember when we did? And then sometimes that will bring that child back to the focus on you. So again, a lot of the skills need to be consistently incorporated in that child's life. So I'm wondering, again, it's time for us to kind of put on our thinking caps. Do you notice any of these things in your children or in your students? Do they sometimes have difficulty accepting other people's ideas and they shut down when you share information? Or do they argue the same point over and over and over again? What about being frustrated, even when the smallest things go wrong that you might not think are that major, or even repeat the same mistake, even after you've helped them continuously? What about having difficulty following a new schedule? Or, this is a big one, getting anxious when plans change. And I deal with this one a lot, and I'll tell you about that. And struggling to take on new or more complicated tasks. As we begin to grow and build understanding, they get nervous, or they have trouble switching from one activity to another. And what about if they get upset when others don't follow the rules? If your answer has been yes to any of these questions, then your child is probably experiencing some flexible thinking issues. So that is the next area of our executive function. When I think about my daughter, who is now 21 years old, and she's a special needs adult, she's an individual with developmental disabilities, and she definitely struggles in the area of flexible thinking, especially when we are trying to change plans. So this is an area that I unfortunately have near and dear to my heart. But what I want to do now is I want to engage you in some flexible thinking. So if you're ready, we're going to follow along with Ms. Holloman.
I'd like to start my talk with a little bit of a demonstration, if you don't mind, but I'm going to need your help, okay? Okay? Okay. Okay, so nothing complicated, I promise. Think of it as an object lesson that has 3 parts. Okay, you ready? All right. First things first, step 1. I need you to sit up and scratch your nose. Awesome, good job. Step 2, without using your hands or your fingers, scratch your nose again. Awesome, good job. Last step, I need you to take your hands and slide them underneath your thighs. Now close your eyes, and I want you to imagine that a little green caterpillar is crawling up the bridge of your nose, making it itch. Without removing your hands from underneath your thighs, scratch your nose.
Okay. You can't move your hand.
Round of applause. Give yourself a round of applause.
Give yourself a round of applause if you attempted to do it. Give yourself some thumbs up if you actually were able to scratch your nose with your hands under your lap. But this was just an example of what happens when plans change or when you have to figure out a different means of accomplishing a task. So if you struggled with this is basically what happens when your child is struggling with flexible thinking. Imagine, if you will, your family is going to the movies and you've decided what movie you're going to see. You couldn't wait. You looked at the preview, you saw all the trailers, everyone is very excited. You get to the movie theater and find out that the ticket is sold out, that they're no longer taking any seats and you can't see it. And your child falls apart. Your child is not able to accept the fact that the plans have changed and we don't know what to do. You may decide, well, let's look at another movie. Let's go see something else. That would be an example of flexible thinking in order. However, the capacity to think before you act is what we're talking about, and being able to think about multiple things, thinking about that movie, for example, that is now being closed off to me, and the opposite of what I can do now. What can I see? And so kids struggle when it comes to flexible thinking because they don't respond well to the problems. Instead, they freeze. Sometimes they do nothing. Other times they go into crisis. And so they may try that same strategy, but you promised I could see that movie. But Mom, we said we were going to see that movie, but we looked at the trailer, but that's the one that we decided to see. So we want to always be mindful that when it comes to flexible thinking, and we can go to the next slide, it's really about getting that child to be able to think about what's happening and to adjust to those changing expectations and those demands. Because of course, when children struggle, they get stuck. And our job is to help them move forward. And how do we do that? With some strategy. Here are some ways that you can help your child or your student if they're struggling with flexible thinking. Break down the tasks into smaller chunks. And Kelly kind of laid this out when she was the teacher and she came in the classroom. First, get your notebook, first sit down at the seat and break them down into smaller chunks so that the student or the child doesn't feel like you're overwhelming them with a lot of information. And then if you can, provide it in advance so that they can plan. I often will share information with our daughter prior to it happening, and I'll continue to do that up until the event so that she has preparation in her mind in how to respond. And then of course, talk about multiple scenarios. Part of flexible thinking is getting stuck in one option. So talk about those multiple scenarios of how to solve a problem, and do it as an adult. Model your thinking. So if your child is struggling with that flexible thinking, it's time for you to show them how to model that thinking. And oftentimes as caregivers, as educators, we sometimes get stuck right along with our students. And we are all trying to figure out what to do next. But that modeling of our thinking and showing how we can think about a thing while a thing is happening is definitely going to go a long way to helping stretch those flexible thinking skills. And then lastly, constantly and explicitly remind your students and your children that there are always other strategies out there, even if you prepare a strategy wheel, but always let them know that there's more than one way to accomplish a task. And again, I would say going back to modeling that behavior is definitely an awesome way to do that. And we've shared with you, and of course, these will be uploaded as part of the presentation, some worksheets that will help students to move into that level of flexible thinking by getting them to think about things. And also the rock brain, which is where the kids get stuck, and the rock brain wants to do what the rock brain wants to do, and he doesn't want to hear any other options. So we listen to one another, we learn how to be flexible, and we exercise those superpowers like Superflex and the Thinkables. Again, these worksheets will be available to you at the end of the presentation. And I love this one because it's especially for those we asked about students who are not as communicative or have issues with their verbal skills. They can begin to draw pictures about their feelings. And I think I actually saw that in the chat, and helping them to think about how change could be good, and telling themselves while we're telling them that change will be okay, that we'll get there together. And of course, encouraging them to talk and always taking deep breaths, which will bring you back to that calm state so that you can rationally think.
All right, we're moving on. We have another one for you. So do you have difficulty with multi-step directions? Do you need to reread the text because you got lost halfway through? Do you have difficulty staying engaged in your class, movie, discussions? Do you have test anxiety, particularly when it's multiple choice and C isn't always the right answer? Do you have inconsistent performance? Some days you're really on, some days you're not. Or do you have a need for more time and repetition? So things like time tests are really difficult for you. And do you oftentimes have a lack of focus? So what we're going to do is see how well you are able to focus. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you some numbers in a minute, and I'm going to flash it up there. I want you to remember the numbers, and then we'll show it to you again so you can see if you're right. If you want to write it down after you look at it, you can, but we're going to see how well you can remember the numbers. All right, let's get started. Okay, write it down. Let's see if we got it right. How many of you got it right? Thumbs up. Let's try another one. Here we go. Write it down. Let's see if we got it right. Thumbs up. All right, ready for the next one? Let's try this. Write it down. Let's see if we got it right. Did you get it right? Getting a little harder. All right, let's try one more. Write it down. Let's see if we got this one right. All right, so as they got more and more difficult as we went on. And some of you probably did really, really well with this activity because you tried different strategies. You might have chunked it, you might have done different groupings. And so what was really happening here was you were using your working memory. And so how this works is when we see something, it goes into what's called temporary storage. And so our brain holds it long enough so we can manipulate that information. And as I said, some of you probably chunked the numbers, grouped the numbers, some way to figure it out. And then you were able to focus your attention long enough to use that information. So that's your working memory that you were just using. So it's that ability to hold information long enough to complete your task. So when you're using this, what we're looking at is how much can you retain in your working memory in order to be then able to execute the task. And that varies from person to person. Unfortunately, our working memory is oftentimes one of the most undetected executive function dysregulation in the classroom. And people tend to label these children as unmotivated, lazy, they don't pay attention. And children oftentimes get punished for not paying attention, when actually what we've done is we've outstripped their ability to pay attention to the sequence because of the length of what we were trying to get them to do. So now let's take a look at how we break this down. Here's some strategies. One is a visualization strategy. We're going to work on that in just a minute. The other is to have your child teach you. So if you ask your child to teach you how to do it, A, you can see where they're making their mistake and you have a chance to recorrect it. But if they're not, it just gives them an opportunity to rehearse it, which gives your brain another opportunity to remember it and transport it into storage long enough to use it. Games like concentration, Simon, all of those are great for visual memory. Active reading is when we actually take and highlight or use sticky notes, because what we're using is another part of our brain to have the motor activity of highlighting it, which then brings our attention and our focus back into that one segment to reread it. And multisensory strategies are things like when teachers put motion to things, they put rhymes to things. When I was a teacher, I used to teach my kids how to sing their spelling words every week. And believe me, I think it was more of a punishment to them because I can't sing, but thankfully they were little kids and they didn't care. But singing and moving and dancing are great ways to get kids to have a multisensory approach. Sometimes they do letters in foam and things like that. Great ways to work on your working memory. All right, so are we ready to practice an activity? All right, we're going to do a visualization. Are we ready? I'm going to describe something and I want you to picture this in your head. Here we go. So it's a dog and it's a small dog, only about 10 to 12 pounds. And the breed of the dog is a Yorkie. They've got pointy little ears. The fur is mostly black. So his back is black, his ears are black, and up until you get to right under the nose is black. But the rest of the face is like a butterscotch color or an apricot color. His chest is white and his legs are black with apricot and then white paws. And he's sitting or basically laying down on the rug looking at the camera. Does everybody have a picture of him in your mind? Let's see if it matches the real picture. Are we ready? Meet Bandit. This is my dog. And what this does, it helps us to get a picture in our mind of what the person is talking about. So it's like when we're reading to people, they want to get that picture in their mind. And so children with autism, as we know, most of their learning is through pictures. So that's a great strategy to use to help children and adults remember. So things like if you always put your keys in the same place, you can visualize right now, most of you, where your keys are. And for those of you that don't, then we have an executive function for you. It's called planning, but we didn't get there yet. All right, let's go on. So we know that there are a lot of apps out there that help us with working memory. And so Dr. Kaslow from Emory University is basically recommending to us that we can use these apps to promote mental health. And the way we do it is by having ourselves or our children participate in these activities, which not only improve their executive function, but then it reduces their acting out behaviors. because it's giving them the skill set to be able to think, plan, and solve problems. These are some of the apps that are highly recommended. Some of you might have heard of. Luminosity is very popular. I've done Cognifit, I've done Memory Trainer, Sudoku, and New York Times. Any of these are great ways to start training your brain and making your memory continue to work and grow.
So back to things that might be living with you or at school with you. Does this sound familiar? Are you frequently late for appointments, for events, sometimes for the kids' games, practices? What about having difficulty guessing how long something will take? You ever have trouble finishing projects? No problem starting them, but lots of trouble finishing them. What about making poor choices when it comes to how you spend your time? And here's a big one that I'm sure all of us, all ages, can attest to: procrastination. If you answered yes to any of these questions, this is what we're talking about: time management. How often do you feel that you don't have enough time to get done all that you need to do? I will share a secret with you. It's actually a well-known secret. We all come into this world with the same 24 hours a day. What we do with those 24 hours often determines our success, or whether we'll struggle with working, with going to school, with taking care of our families. So when it comes to that EF skill of time management, it's really about understanding the concept of time. It's about estimating how much time you need to get a task done and how you can use that time effectively and efficiently to meet your deadlines. We love the work of Peg Dawson and Dr. Richard Greer, and they talk about learning time management as it pertains to effectively using your time. Again, that same 24 hours, how we use it is going to determine our levels of success, because how we use our time management skills not only affects us as individuals, but it affects everyone around us. It affects people that we engage with. It affects our classrooms. It affects families. So it's really important understanding the concepts of time management, because they relate to our future success, not only professionally, but academically for our children, vocationally, and even socially. How often do we miss events because of our time management, and we lose out on great time? So when we wonder what exactly is time management, it's really being able to estimate how long it's going to take to do this task. It's putting all the priorities in place. I'm going to need to do this first. It's going to take 20 minutes. And then I'm going to need to do this. It's going to take another 15 minutes. And then it's about dividing your time between those tasks and all the way pacing yourself so that you can get it done by using your time wisely. Pathways to Success tells us that it helps us to work to meet the deadlines. But again, it's all about the conceptual idea of understanding time. It doesn't matter if we wear a watch if we don't use that time effectively. So the research has told us that there's definitely a correlation, as I mentioned, between various.
Even if it's still, you know.
Oh, I thought you had a question. No worries. There's definitely a correlation between the academic sector, our vocational sector, and our social success. And so we want to help our students to really understand time management. We as adults, we built this amazing presentation, and we understand that we have to present it in a certain amount of time. So the preparation for us to put it together entails knowing how much information should go into each section, and then knowing how we're going to deliver it in a way that keeps you engaged and keeps you with us and gives you the tools that you need when this is over. And I will say that even our students with disabilities or who have varied amounts of learning needs also struggle with time concepts, and they definitely have poor management skills. So this is an area, again, that we want to work with consistently with our students to help them. And I'm with you, Elizabeth, she said all the time. dealing with time management and running to make sure that we're beating the clock and usefully using those 24 hours. So here's a tool that we can share, and you can find this on the Pathway to Success, and it gives you some interventions specifically for students, things that you can use to help them build those time management skills, especially practicing estimating the time it takes. It will probably take about 15 minutes to do this math worksheet. Making those checklists. When the math sheet is done, I check it off and then I prioritize and go on to the next item. Keeping a daily schedule is awesome, especially for those who are not yet sending their students back to school and they've had to turn the home into a school. This is a great visual, and using those timers during the work sessions, whether it's the big clocks, the small clocks. Sometimes you're right, some mark timing warnings sometimes do set off your children. So you would pick the right type of timer or you may not use that timer. It may be a different level. It may be beads. It may be some other resource. And then practice what it means to pace yourself. I definitely love how we're teaching and practicing discussing routines, having conversations over meal. We're able to spend more time with our families, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, but it's given us more time to teach some of these skills that we were expecting to automatically just happen. And then those reflective worksheets during the sessions, definitely identifying and reducing distractions. That is important, especially in this time, especially now when our students are really driven by the technology because of the remote learning. So we want to make sure that any additional distractions that might cause that time to whittle away, that we are paying attention to it. And then minimizing downtime, which we've had a lot of during this time of learning from home, and always teaching those skills to your children to stay organized and to help them become time efficient as it pertains to their work, as it pertains to their book bags, maybe their desks, and even their notebooks. These are all amazing strategies. So you can also, to help them stay organized, to-do lists. This is what we need to do today. And again, order them in importance. That's very important. And we will reiterate throughout all of these workshops, routine, routine, routine. Establish those routines with your students, establish those routines with your children, because again, the brain learns through repetition. And so as we continue to establish those routines, you're also helping to build those skills, and modeling and practicing, estimating how long time will take.
All right, let's move on. So do you have difficulty tracking your work, your to-do list, and your activities? Perhaps you have difficulty choosing to do the more fun or less important things first. Do you have difficulty completing those long-term projects on time? Or maybe you become overwhelmed with the amount of work you have to get done. Well, if any of these sound familiar to you, it's time to tune up your planning and prioritizing skills. Let's take a look. So when we are creating a roadmap of how we want to get a task done, that's called our planning. And prioritizing is when we take a look at what are the main things that have to get done versus the things that are of low importance or low relevance. So planning and prioritizing go hand in hand. You prioritize and then you plan accordingly so that you're using your time and your effort wisely. So I want you to think about these. Each of these, I want you to decide if it's a need or a want, right? Bottled water, haircut, college education, visit to the doctor's, peanut butter and jelly sandwich, Netflix, car. So for each of us, we probably answered that based on our priorities. A haircut is not necessarily a need unless you're going for a job interview. Now, a car may not be a need unless you live in a remote area and there's no public transportation. I really have trouble coming up with an argument for Netflix, but I'm sure some of you who are, love to watch those Netflix series could probably argue that as well. But the point here is we need to distinguish needs and wants. And what we have to teach our children is to, one is to think about what they want most, what are the resources they have available to them, to prioritize that list now, and then go on to what's the most important. And this is a struggle for children who oftentimes say they need everything instead of understanding, well, I really just want that. But that's an important prerequisite skill to determining priority. So there are 4 steps that are recommended in this process. The first one is understanding what the task is completely, so you can plan and understand what that planning looks like. You then rank the items in terms of what are the steps to complete it. You set deadlines of when you're going to complete the specific task, but you're also flexible in understanding that life happens. So we need to understand at any given point, our plan may need to change or our priorities may change, and we need to remain flexible enough to make those adjustments so we still meet our timelines. These are some strategies you can use: a daily schedule, a timer. The red clock is great for kids who don't understand the concept of time. So when the red is gone, time is up. Helping kids to decide what's urgent and important helps them to figure out how to prioritize. And of course, a checklist is a great way to have that sense of completion and being able to move on to the next one. Sometimes kids need to be able to do it on a daily basis. So the organizer on your left helps them to look at what does that daily afternoon routine look like. And then some families who are very busy and always going in places need to have more of a weekly planner so that we can see at any given point where we're going to be. And that helps us to build in the routine and also to plan for what's coming up so we can help children with that flexibility.
So we're coming to the end of our journey for this evening, and there is definitely light at the end of the tunnel. We've shared a lot of information about building this particular bucket within the executive function skills. And guess what? We all have areas that we said yes to, which are areas that we need to work to improve. But we also have areas where we couldn't find ourselves, which means that we're doing pretty okay. So you might want to give yourself a pat on the back and just thinking about the opportunities that we have to learn, to continue to grow, and to boost those skills. And reminding you that the thought skills bucket includes flexibility, metacognition, time management, planning and prioritization, and working memory. And as long as you keep working at it, it will continue to grow and you will flourish.
All right, so remember that poll we took at the beginning of this workshop? Let's go back and see what the results show us. So it looks like, based on the results, I get anxious when plans or schedule change, tend to have 45% of the group, followed by I'm sometimes late for appointments. And then we have a big drop until we get to I struggle with completing long-term projects. And finally, if I get stuck, I may quit. And we only had 2% say I have difficulty following multi-step directions. So great job with the poll.
And that just looks like most of us, almost half of us, need to work on our flexible thinking skills.
All right, so in case we didn't make it clear, this shares with you each of the statements and where they are. So if you're late for those meetings, it's your time management. If you struggle with those long-term projects, that's your planning and prioritizing. If you get stuck and quit, that's your metacognition. And when you're anxious or when there are changes, that's flexible thinking. And lastly, if you have difficulty following multi-steps, that's your working memory executive function skill. So we're going to leave you with a couple of thoughts. One is change your thoughts and you change your world. And from our great friend, Albert Einstein, We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. So I leave you with these thoughts tonight. Remain flexible in your thinking, seek new perspectives, create order out of chaos, take time to reflect, invest your time and effort wisely, and never stop learning.
As always, we are so grateful that you took the time this evening to be with us to learn more about all things executive function. And as we promised, this recording will be available within 7 to 10 days, along with the PowerPoint and all the resources that accompanied our conversation. So all who were asking in the chat, it will be available. You will receive an email to let you know when you can access that information. In the meantime, you can always go to childrensguild.org/webinars to look at previous webinars and also to prepare yourself for what is to come. Speaking of what is to come, we're going to stay on the executive function skills and those 3 buckets through May. So next month, join us on April 21st when we'll talk about actions. And then make sure you come back to wrap it up on May 19th when we'll deal with the heart of it all, the emotions. Thank you again for joining us. Kelly?
Just one thing I want to share with you is that if you are interested in being part of the the Kids First movement, what we'd ask is that you join us for the Kids First movement meetings, which are held every month. And we're working on how do we change the future of our children. So it's a group of individuals who share this passion for creating a world where our children can succeed and changing the way America cares for and educates its children. So if you'd like to learn more about it and join us in these meetings, you're welcome to visit the kidsfirstamerica.org website. You can register for our meetings and come in and share your thinking and your expertise and help us to make a difference in the world for our children. Thank you all for visiting with us and sharing your time. We appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing you next month.
Take care. Be well.
Bye now.